Lilo, please get down. I'm trying to record this podcast. Thank you. Hey fam, how's it going? How is it going? I haven't spoken to many of you all year, but we're back. And it's been so long that I literally forgot the name of the software that I used to record this podcast. I spent a good 10 minutes trying to recall and search for the tool that I used to record this podcast. That is terrible. But yeah, that's where we are. We're back. And as my daughter would say, uh-oh, back again. Mumbling that last part because she doesn't know the words. Neither do I. But I took a much needed break. And I think this is the second year that I've taken the last 2 weeks of December off. So basically when the kids are off, out of school, I'm off and out of work. But if I'm being completely honest, it was more like the last week of December because that first week of vacation wasn't really a vacation because I was working my behind off. But I promise to do better this year. This year, it will be 2 weeks of no work, and I will definitely plan better, have better systems, processes, and team members in place and communicate my expectations better. This year, I slept in. I did try really hard to work on the business. That was the plan. It's like, okay, I'm going to take time off. I'm going to relax. And then I'm going to do some work on the business, not in the business, but on the business. It didn't work out that way. My body was like, no. So recently I was forced into reflecting on why I keep finding myself in certain situations. Is it me? Is it me, Jesus? Like, am I the problem? Absolutely am the problem. And the problem is I keep avoiding these conversations to keep the peace. Like I keep trying to put off difficult conversations, but it doesn't work. So I end up like just bottling it all inside and being frustrated and then having these conversations in my head that I need to be having in person. And I keep getting disappointed. I take full responsibility for that. If I would have communicated properly, I wouldn't even be in this position. So I know that's a lot, but welcome to episode 111 of the Own Your Genius podcast. Today, we're discussing work for hire, but that I want to finish my thoughts on communicating, but don't worry, it's all going to tie together. At least it should. We're going to see. Okay, y'all ready to get into it? Let's do it. Okay. So one of the situations I keep finding myself in is that I'm still overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed after hiring team members. I'm like, how can this be? But in this trying to figure out how I'm still overwhelmed, even though I've hired people, I realized that people don't hire, like they don't avoid hiring people because they want to do everything themselves. Like they don't hire people because they don't want to communicate. Because it takes time to communicate. By communication, it takes time, it takes patience, and a willingness to understand somebody other than yourself. But the payoff to communication varies. But in this case here, for me, it's not having to do everything myself. One of the things that I've been seeing lately is a lot of these, slow down to hurry up posts. I've been seeing that a lot this year. Like you got to take a step back. So that's what properly communicating your needs and how you want things done works. Like I have this whole list of things that needs to get done and they can absolutely be delegated, but I've held on to it because my team doesn't know how to do it. That's one of the things that I've said because I am really tech savvy. Like I like tech. I pick it up pretty well, and the systems that we use, like software, when I say systems in this case I mean software, the software that we use is not software that's commonly used in entrepreneurship that the virtual assistants are used to working with, right? And I've used that as an excuse not to delegate certain things that I absolutely could be delegating. Not only that software, I have some other software, that is very commonly used. Like, for example, our newsletter. People use ActiveCampaign all day, every day, right? My particular VA wasn't familiar with it, and that's fine. But I use that as an excuse to keep doing things that I really have no business doing. And particularly, I was like, my newsletter, we have the first part of the newsletter and it needs to be my voice. So I need to do newsletters weren't getting put out because who has the time? But in order to be consistent, I was like, okay, what can I do? What if I take the part that needs to be written by me and I write it and then I just send it to her, right? But then she doesn't know what to do. What if I record a video, like instead of me doing like me open it up like I'm going to do it and send that to her? In the time that it takes me to do all of that, send it to her, I mean, it takes time. But if I do it once, I won't have to do it again. And I haven't had to do it again. And it's great. It makes my heart very happy. And I have really a laundry list of other things that I can delegate if I take the time to communicate my needs and how I would like it done properly. Anyway, when you get to the point where you're ready to hire help in your business, some of those hires might be responsible for creating things in your business. They can be responsible for taking photos, recording videos, creating content, graphics, copy, or other copyrighted material, because each of those things that I mentioned can be protected by copyright law if it's an original work that has some level of creativity to it. And as a business owner, the challenge is knowing who owns the rights to that work. So here's the answer. Write this down, put it on a sticky note somewhere where you can like, oh, I forgot. Oh, this is what the answer is. Who owns the rights to these works that's created by this person, right? The rights lay with the person who creates the work. That's the answer. That person is also known as the author, which means all the rights that a copyright owner would have, the right to distribute, the right to publish, the right to sell, the right to create derivatives, all of those rights lay with that person. Unless, because there's always an unless, right? Unless that work is a work for hire. Now, there are only two instances when work for hire applies. And whenever I speak about work for hire, I only typically speak of the first instance because that's the one that usually applies to business owners. And that first instance of work for hire is when an employee creates the work in the scope of their employment. Employee, not independent contractor. So an employee doing the work in the scope of their employment would look like, and I give this example often, right? You have someone that works for McDonald's, they work in corporate, their job is marketing, and they create marketing copy. That's their job. That copy belongs to McDonald's. On the other hand, if you go into the establishment of McDonald's and you go to the fry cook, and the fry cook comes up with something catchy to market McDonald's product or fries, his job is not to create marketing copy. His job is to fry the fries, make sure they're hot, got enough salt on it to keep us coming back, right? So in the first instance, the copy belongs to McDonald's when the marketing person is creating the copy. In the second instance, when the person's job is to fry the fries and not create copy, that copy belongs to the fryer, the person who on the fries, because it's not in the scope of their employment, right? So one of the things, people write contracts all day long and they'll say, oh, well, this work is a work for hire. And analyzing whether or not it's a work for hire, the courts are going to look at the relationship between you and the person that you hired to do the work to determine if that person was truly an employee. They're going to consider three things, right? The first thing they're going to consider is the amount of control you have over the work. They're going to look at things like, did you have a voice in how the work is done? Where's the work actually being completed? So that's one, the amount of control that you have over the work. They're also going to look at the amount of control you have over the person doing the work. Do you control the schedule? Does that person perform other assignments for you? How do you pay them? How often do you pay them? The third thing they're going to look at is the status of you as an employer. Do you withhold taxes? Is your business in the business of producing the work that you hired this person to do for you? Do you provide benefits for this person? So they're going to look at things like that. Now, if the courts determine that the work was created by an independent contractor, it doesn't matter if you have a work for hire agreement because the work was not a work for hire and the rights will remain with that independent contractor. Whew, listen, and I'm telling you this for a reason, because the streets will have you believe that all you need is a work for hire agreement and you are safe. But that's not how it works. Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about the thing that I very rarely talk about, which is a work for hire, especially commission works. This doesn't apply to all commission works. Look at the name. It literally says specially commission works. So, because it's specially, they're going to tell you what special is. So, it only applies to non-specific types of work. The first one is a contribution to a collective work. So, when we're talking about collective work, think magazines, newspapers, Reader's Digest, encyclopedias, things of that nature. The second one is if it's part of a motion picture or another type of audiovisual work. And when I think about it, the audiovisual work could apply to some of you, because especially if you outsource your video course presentation or you have someone that's creating any type of audiovisual work for you, then it could apply to you in that case. Translation, translating something from one language to another, or that's number 3. 4 would be a supplementary work. A supplementary work refers to work that's ordered and that will be used as part of a collective work. So think of illustrations, forewords, maps that could be a part of something that's in that collective work. A compilation is work that's formed from pre-existing material. You got all these other things that are already created, right? No one's commissioning you really to create something because it's already created. But this pre-existing material is created in such a way that it creates an original work. That is something that can be considered a work for hire. You also have instructional text, so work that you prepare for the purpose of using in systematic instructional activities. That's 6. 7 would be a test, creating a test. 8 would be the answer material for a test. And 9 would be an atlas, hiring someone to create an atlas for you. So there are 9 very specific types of work that qualify for work for hire. In order to properly have a work for hire, what you're going to need to do is make sure that the scope of work falls within one of those 9 categories. And then the second thing is there must be a written agreement between the party that ordered or commissioned the work and the person that's going to create the work. And then the third thing is that written agreement has to specifically say that this is a work for hire. And the fourth element is that the agreement has to be signed by all parties. If you're missing one of those 4, then it's not a work for hire. So we're clear, everything is not a work for hire. So here's the effect of having a work for hire. What it essentially means is when you're entering into this work for hire agreement, the person who brought the work to life has 0 rights in that work because they are not considered the author. The person that commissioned the work will be considered the author. Also, the expiration date for the copyright also differs, because for work for hire, the copyright for the work in question lasts for a period of 95 years from publication or 120 years from creation, whichever one of those is shorter. They aren't giving you all the time. Whichever one is, most of the time it's like, oh, whichever one is longer. No. They're like, whichever one of these is shorter. You can't keep this stuff forever. It had to fall into public domain at some time. So if you're employing people, you need to have language in your contracts that uses this work for hire language. If they're doing work in the scope of their employment, and that includes them creating things for you, you want to make sure that you as the business owner are the author. But one of the things I thought about is that we have a lot of our listeners who are employees that are transitioning into entrepreneurship, and they're using the same skills in their entrepreneurship that they use in their 9-to-5. And if this is you, I'll need you to make sure you read your contract very carefully to make sure that you avoid any conflicts or confusion with your employer once you start blowing up and doing really well in business. You don't want them to come back and be like, oh, wait a minute. They did that using our intellectual property. No, you don't want that at all. Now, so if this is the case, if work for hire is limited what's your option? Like, one of the things, what do you do in those cases? And we'll talk about it more in another episode. But in those cases, what you could do is use a copyright assignment or transfer agreement to make sure that you own those rights. And we'll talk about that in another episode, because I want to go to a little bit more detail on what the implications or the consequences of using your business. Okay, that was great. Getting into the swing of things. Tell me what you think. Next week, is it next week? No, it's not next week. This time thing is getting me. So it's not next week. The week after, essentially, our first Murray's Law of the year is coming up. And it's going to be February 13th. And I know that is because it's my second born's birthday. She will be a whole 15 years old. Oh my goodness, where did the time go? I have no idea. And we're going to try a little something different for Murray's Law in the new year. We're going to switch the time and make it more of a lunch and learn, and we're going to make it more of a webinar type style. And so we're going to have topics that we'll talk about, and you can always submit your questions, and if your question gets chosen, so you can still ask your questions, and then we'll pull it and make it a webinar situation. And next week, I keep saying next week, but on the 13th, what we're going to talk about, and I feel like it's a subject we really need to talk about now, since more people are getting trademarks and you have people who are trying to figure out what they need. And one of the things I want to talk about is, how do you protect your brand before you launch? And how do you do that without committing fraud? So that's what episode 113 is going to be about. Don't ask me about episode 112 because I forgot. I can't remember. And it's not in front of me right now. But yes, I'm excited. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first Own Your Genius podcast of the year. Until next week, keep building your business, growing your brand, and doing what? Owning your genius.